Now in the best of the rest of the news, yesterday, agri-giant and GMO pusher Monsanto announced that the company would no longer be applying for the approval of new genetically modified seeds in Europe. A German spokeswoman for the corporation said that, quote, as long as there's not enough demand from farmers for these products and the public at large doesn't accept the technology, it makes no sense to fight against windmills. Now, this isn't new. Monsanto has not applied for new seeds patents in Europe for the past 3 years. And this is because Europeans are very skeptical about GMO technology, thanks in part to mass anti-GMO protests across Europe that have hampered Monsanto's ability to break through their market. The European Union has set up some of the most stringent regulations against GMOs in the entire world. Despite recent mass anti-GMO protests right here in the United States, though, GMOs still reign supreme, pushing seed patents and growing billions of dollars worth of potentially dangerous genetically modified crops. The use of GMOs in the United States has grown drastically in the last 15 years. And today, as much as 70% of food on shelves in grocery stores in the United States are made from GMOs, made from genetically modified organisms. We learned last week that unapproved GMOs can now just randomly appear in a farm field in Oregon. We learned at the beginning of this year that lawmakers are perfectly okay with Monsanto lobbyists using backdoor channels in Congress to pass secret giveaways like the Monsanto Protection Act, which allows GMO corporations to ignore the rulings of courts that question the safety of their product. And we learned during the elections last year that the GMO industry can use money to deny Californians the right to know whether or not the food they're eating grows naturally or was engineered in a lab. So now that we see this political powerhouse, Monsanto, actually running away from Europe with its tail between its legs, what can we learn in the United States to shift the balance away from frankenfoods? Joining me now is Anthony Gucciardi, co-founder, editor, and investigative journalist with Natural Society. Anthony, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so how come Monsanto and other GMO products have failed to gain traction in Europe? What are they doing that we're not doing here in the United States?
Well, the simple reality is that we know the United States government and certain corrupt, paid-off politicians within the United States government. In fact, I published an extensive list, and it's available online all around the web now, of politicians that are receiving upwards of 40 grand, like Roy Blunt, who actually co-wrote the Monsanto Protection Act, which blocks Monsanto from all federal courts in the United States, and he received $42,000 or more publicly to his campaign. So we know that Europe, the actual government system in Europe in many of the areas, is actually a bit more open to reason, and it's not getting paid off as much by Monsanto, mostly as well because of the fact that Monsanto has never really established such a strong foothold there. But what we do know is that the U.S. State Department actually is using taxpayer dollars to push Monsanto over in Europe and other areas. So the fact of the matter is that the United States government and certain individuals within it are on the side of Monsanto, and they will simply never admit to the fact that the GMOs, despite over 34 now peer-reviewed research pieces of information now available in the National Library of Medicine showing that Roundup and GMOs are causing lymphoma and cancer, they'll never admit that because, quite frankly, they're on the side of Monsanto, who has over 500 officials now and media that formerly were with Monsanto, such as Michael Taylor, or are currently with Monsanto.
So the science here, as you said, all these peer-reviewed studies that seem to link genetically modified foods with cancers and tumors and things like that, the science is the same on both sides of the Atlantic. I mean, in the United States, we see the science. In Europe, we see the science. But the completely different reactions to that science and to the GMO industry is strictly based on money and politics, you'd say.
Well, I would say that, and I would also say we're seeing major success here in the United States. It's just not translating to legislation. So, for example, I went to the March Against Monsanto, and you guys were covering it, doing a great deal of coverage on that, and I want to give props to you. Good work on that. But I went to the one in Philadelphia. Right now I'm in Austin, but I was traveling, and I went there. I was the only individual with a news crew. I had a cameraman and some others there. The only person with a news crew. Everything I did not film went down the memory hole, and I was so surprised to see that NBC, CBS, the big guys, not of us saying that it happened, but there was no coverage whatsoever. And of course, that's what we're going to see when the media and the government do not want this to go down. Yet there are activists who are pushing for it like never before. So I think the support is there in the general public. I mean, 93+% of people say they are in favor of labeling GMOs, but in Europe, it's not so staunch. It's not a crackdown on the people as much over there in the case of GMOs.
Anthony, what do you make of this story that broke last week of this non-approved GMO that was found growing in Oregon? What might come out of that? And is that something that could help rally even more support for this anti-GMO movement that you're talking about that's sweeping across the United States and the world?
I think that is also the beginning of the end for Monsanto and GMOs at large, and not to mention Connecticut just passed some legislation. But yes, GMO contamination is a major issue, and people don't seem to understand that. I mean, back in 2005, there was evidence that genetically modified alfalfa had already cross-contaminated with organic seeds and organic farmlands. So Monsanto's been at this time and time again. And let's not forget that we say, oh, it's safe and everything like that, but the experimental test fields are not properly being conducted to the point now where Japan and South Korea are saying we don't even want United States wheat anymore because it could be genetically contaminated. It could endanger our population. So these other countries know about this. It's only the United States that is denying any of it, and it's only the United States where you won't see the fact that GMO contamination admitted by the USDA, who loves Monsanto, which is very concerning, that the GMO contamination went far and wide, but everywhere else in the world, you're seeing internationally reported there's GMO contamination, the wheat and everything else. I mean, it's spreading like crazy, but you won't hear it here unless you listen to this program and others.
Yeah. Anthony, in March, they passed this Monsanto Protection Act. It was never a standalone bill. There was never a debate. It was just slipped into the appropriations bill, and it was lobbied to be slipped in the appropriations bill. Is this how Monsanto operates in Congress, just really sketchy behind closed doors? We just have a few seconds left.
Sure, that's the only way they can operate. They couldn't get this by publicly. They throw it in as a little rider in a Senate spending bill that's not related at all, that apparently would collapse the government if it didn't pass. So, I mean, the reality is that Monsanto is a slippery criminal, and it's done Agent Orange, it's created Agent Orange, which killed over 300,000, led to 500,000 plus birth defects. This is a company that cannot be trusted, period.
Yeah. Anthony, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks a lot.